The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states.
The time for empty talk is over.
You don't get to do anything you want to.
But
millions of people have got to stand up and demand that we have a government that represents all of us, not the 1%.
do not allow anyone to tell you that it cannot be done.
Welcome to Kleptocracy Podcast, Ep 2, The Clone Wars. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jay.
And today we're going to talk about the Capitol chaos, the things that happened on Wednesday, and a few other things that we want to discuss. So if you want to get in on it, go ahead and connect with us on Instagram, Twitter, the YouTubes at Kleptocracy Podcast.
And you can also reach us at Twitter at Kleptocracy Pod for the Twitter handle.
Yep, and do that. We would like to engage in people and not just hear ourselves talk, but other ideas, other perspectives are welcome. One thing I want to say is I 110% disavow the actions of the Trump supporters who broke into the Capitol buildings in DC, Salem, Oregon, Olympia, Washington, and any other places that they might have done it. And thoughts go out to the families of those who died during those events.
Yeah, I agree. I do not condone those actions. I believe it was, as we've all witnessed, it seemed very not only authoritarian of a takeover, but it paralleled that of a coup. I've seen a lot of arguments on, especially like on social media, like Twitter, about whether it was a real coup with military connections or just like a bottom-up coup. But I think the intentions were still malicious, irregardless. So, I'm inclined to agree.
I'm setting a timer. So the first thing, let's see here what I got up on my browser here is from this NBC News. Dejected Trump supporters leave. Oh, okay, never mind. Oh, okay. I don't know what it is doing. Leave Washington, create new theories for Capitol violence. Let's see here. It's just, it's really crazy what happened on Wednesday. I didn't think anything like this would ever happen in my lifetime. It's insane. It's insane that people got so upset about an election that they decided they want to break into the Capitol and stop the certification of an election where the majority of people voted and elected somebody. I mean, that's what happened, and they got really mad and decided to break into stuff. It's
Stop the count.
Stop the count. Stop the steal. And I want to give, I guess we could talk about what that, Twitter and Facebook's actions in what happened. Prior to the Capitol riots, Trump was at a rally and he got his supporters all rallied up, I guess, pun, and he's like, let's go walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue, and let's just go take it back. Let's stop the steal. Let's stop them from stealing this because they stole it. And a bunch of shit happened. He just sat in his office and picked his ass or whatever he does in his office, and then everything happened. And after hours he finally posted a video on Twitter, a recorded video on Twitter, telling people to go home. Again, he reassured them that he loved them and that this election was stolen and it was all fraudulent, but it's time to go home now. And so after that, Twitter and Facebook basically banned his accounts. They suspended his Facebook account and his Twitter account. And like, kudos for them for doing that, because it can incite a lot more violence, you know, and kudos to them. However, I can see the counter argument for doing something like that. It's stifling free speech at a point. I mean, you're seeing Apple threaten to take down the app Parler, which I guess is like a conservative version of Twitter. I mean, I don't know if Twitter had a ideology, but it's more conservatives, I guess, are on Parler than Twitter. I don't know. And then Apple threatened to take the app down if Parler didn't put up some mandatory posting policy or something. So Parler had to go through and basically create these regulations on their platform. You know, you can't post things about killing people or inciting, you know, basic stuff like that. Or they were going to take down the app. And a lot of people call that a violation of freedom of speech, that Apple and Google and Facebook and Twitter and all these places can just shut down someone's speech.
Can I just respond to that?
Yeah, always.
So, I mean, we have to also consider the fact, like, you know, freedom of speech and the First Amendment, you know, that would apply to like the narrative, I think, and the principle of why we need to regulate a lot of these platforms like public utilities, because these are private companies. And, you know, it's funny, I hear a lot of conservatives and those on the right, even though I'm consider myself a lefty, that it's just like a double standard. You know, they defend freedom of speech until, you know, those on the left or Democrats say something, and then I don't hear any, you know, defense, you know, for it. And but I do see them use that same argument. I see conservatives all the time say, oh, well, if this lefty or independent content creator, like say on YouTube, is blacklisted or the algorithm doesn't promote their content, they're like, well, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want. And now that this is happening, I just think it goes to the consensus of, you know, if you believe in freedom of speech, then maybe a lot of these social media platforms should be regulated like a public utility, you know, because we're giving basically oligarchs and the giant tech industry a lot of power, you know. So, but that's just the point I wanted to make. I don't disagree. I agree with what you're saying. You know, inciting violence is a violation of, as it should be, of Twitter's rules. So for him to basically not even be apologetic and then defend law enforcement, and then at the same time, you know, not downplay and incite the violence for those riots, it's just hypocritical, and, you know, it's just asinine. So I'm not surprised at all.
No, they have their own TNCs, and you have to follow their TNCs when you are on their platform. That's kind of how it works. You know, you got to follow the TNCs when you're at a public pool. You got to follow TNCs when you're at the grocery store. Like these, you know, these are things that you need to follow. You know, it's just like people now who are conservative, and people who are conservative are now arguing that Twitter and Facebook and Apple and Google and all these companies that are, you know, are far, far left. Obviously, they're Hollywood elitists, they're Silicon Valley elitist run companies, so which means they're leftists, and they're all that are
That's what they presume.
are basically trying to stifle freedom of speech. And basically they're trying to, they're claiming that if it's not a left-leaning opinion or ideology or video or whatever, then it can be shut down, and then that they are stopping freedom of speech.
It's funny. I just have to say that like freedom of speech is more of like it's more of a left, and you can even argue. I've heard some people like say that's more of a classical liberal, not liberal in the sense of a
No.
neoliberal,
Yeah.
but like a classical liberal
Yep.
idea. So I just find it funny. Yeah, that they insinuate that they think, because it's not even a right idea. So it'd be politically on the spectrum or left.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a classically liberal idea, definitely taken from Greek times, reevaluated during the Renaissance and then reintroduced again during the American Revolution, things like that, the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of having a freedom of speech, say whatever you want. However, freedom of speech doesn't protect like violent speech. It doesn't.
Or hate speech.
Yeah, it doesn't protect you trying to inflict violence on another person or a group of people. That's not what freedom of speech is. And it's irritating that a lot of people don't know that. Oh, it's freedom of speech means all speech is protected. Like it's not what that means. Freedom of speech is more like you have the freedom to critique anything. It's the idea of critiquing society, of critiquing your political leaders. That's really what freedom of speech is. It's not you have the freedom of speech to yell fire, or yell bomb,
or bomb
at
an airport.
Yeah, that's not freedom of speech. That's not. So there's a difference. But some people are worried that this could start some type of war on freedom of speech, just shutting down all this type of conservative talk. And I get the idea of what they're saying, but I think that's a slippery slope argument, and slippery slope arguments to me just don't hold any water, or hold any landslide mud, as a slippery slope, is a landslide. And I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me because there's no precedent for that. You can't just come up with a hypothetical slippery slope argument. When a company creates T's and C's, it's like, hey, you can use our platform. You can be a conservative, you can be a liberal, whatever your ideology is. You can be that on our platform, but you cannot organize a violent protest. You cannot tell somebody you're going to kill them on our platform. And that's that's any platform. I can't go out into my local grocery store and look at somebody and go, I'm going to murder you. What? That's a threat on somebody's life. You can't do that. And so I don't think that is protected under freedom of speech. And I think that's something that they're misunderstanding what freedom of speech is.
Yeah, I just think that this just reinforces just the principle of regulating platforms like a public utility, in my opinion, just because like if you're going to use that, that as a reason, I don't want to say plausible deniability, but just, on the merits of freedom of speech, like there is no hate speech or inciting violence that protects those, even if that was the case. But again, these aren't public utilities, which they should be, but they're in the private sector. And I don't know, like for me, what bugs me is like, Trump really, he kicked a lot of networks, from his like press media, meetings and, like, or in any symposium setting, like, he kicked a lot of news outlets out that he didn't even agree with. Sometimes it was Fox, but for the most part, it was CNN. And I have my criticisms of any corporate network and their interests, but, I just find that laughably hypocritical and a double standard. That's just the part that like, it's hard for me to get to look over that, when I hear that argument from people, or that I've seen anyway, from people stating that on the right. So
yeah, that's fair. Another thing I found interesting, I'm sure you've watched plenty of videos on things that have happened on Wednesday. One thing I found interesting was how the police allegedly or seemingly just kind of let people in. You know what I mean? They just kind of like stepped aside and let people walk in.
Yeah, they took selfies with them. So a couple did.
Yeah, and so that brings me to another point, is that if that was a Black Lives Matter protest, they would not even gotten close. The National Guard would have been there, within minutes to shoot rubber bullets at them, to pepper spray them, to beat them with nightsticks. That's, and a lot of people say, well, it's not really about, like, no, we know what happens, because if we look at when the Target was ransacked, police showed up and started, arresting people and pepper spraying them and shooting them with rubber bullets. And then when a bunch of Trump supremacists come up and just basically walk into the Capitol, they don't do anything.
And I just want to state that, like, a lot of these leftist movements, and yeah, I'll state my bias, like I consider myself along the left, but it does, I have to say that, like the merits and the intentions of Black Lives Matter, and to address social and economic inequality, and peacefully protesting and putting public pressure on institutions, I do think that is quite a bit different than basing a fraudulent claim on voter fraud that never even happened. It's gaslighting. It's just a fabricated notion to basically commit a riot on Capitol, on
Right.
Capitol building. And I just think that you have one scenario where they're trying to address these systemic issues, and then another which is basically conjured. The entire narrative is. So if you want to be objective, you have to look at it, what the merits and what each group is advocating for, and in the Black Lives Matter protests, you've had journalists and peaceful protesters shot in the eyes with rubber bullets. If you can look up, there's a lot of disturbing footage and pictures even on Twitter that you won't even see on national media, but they've had their eyes permanently taken out, and they've thrown tear gas, and I didn't see any of that. To me, it looked completely complicit, and they weren't even equipped, against these Trump supporters. And I mean, from my opinion, or from my perspective, it just seems like a lot of law enforcement and a lot of people that work in law enforcement ideologically, align themselves and with the same spectrum, on the same side of the political spectrum as them. You literally could see them taking pictures and just casually letting them in. I didn't really see any real attempt to hold them back. I saw a withdrawal, and then it took them an hour for them to even, actually over an hour, wasn't it, for any backup to even come. And I'll let you go.
The thing about it is, I was listening to this radio program called NPR. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's kind of a big national thing.
No,
It's
never heard of
public
it.
and it's radio. I don't know. And they had one of the senators or representatives who chairs the committee that appropriates funds for the Capitol Police. Something like $700 million they give to the Capitol Police. And he's pissed. He's pissed off that they didn't do anything, that there wasn't any police there, that they they have weapons, but for some reason they didn't use them. He's irritated that it took an hour or so for others to arrive for them to really get anything under control. He's really, really, really pissed off that the police just let them walk in and do whatever the hell they wanted.
Well, it's just a clear double standard, and it's just laughably and comically hypocritical, you know.
Yeah. It's asinine that this happened, and I know nothing will happen under a Trump administration, even though there's 2 weeks left. There'll be no investigation or prosecution or anything like that. I don't think
There's been some ramifications, actually. I know that I think last time I looked at the report, like I think 5 people died, and one was a police officer.
Yeah, 5 people died. One woman was shot in the neck as she crawled through the window to try to break in. 3 others had some type of medical condition or medical emergency. Something happened, and then a police officer also died from injuries sustained.
That lady that died, I believe, was also in the Air Force.
Yeah,
if I
a 15-year
recollect.
Air Force veteran.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just it's weird that the majority of the police didn't do anything. Taking selfies with them, letting them walk through. It's just weird. And even in Washington State, Jay Inslee is also pissed off because the police didn't do anything to stop them. They just walked in.
Yeah, that was so unwarranted. I couldn't believe that. They just breached the gates.
Yeah, and they just walked in, and the police didn't do anything about it. And he's like, "Why did you guys not do anything?" I don't know. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's kind of convenient that the police, who are supposed to protect and serve everybody, just let them walk in, and it's just like, okay, like I think it's weird. So there's that. I did, just let them walk in. I can't believe that.
And one thing we should touch on is like what we were talking about before we started this video was, the concept of, was this considered a coup? Was it not? I've seen that being debated. I think the malicious intent of a coup was definitely there, even as a bottom-up approach. But I've seen arguments, usually you have connections to the military when you overthrow a government and commit a coup.
Sure.
But in my opinion, it doesn't matter. The intentions of overthrowing the government and officials were still there, violently. And for all the wrong reasons. I mean, I'm not advocating or condoning violence, but it's just really abhorrent that, the intent itself was, it was very repugnant and grotesque. So
no, yeah, it shouldn't have ever happened. And I think,
and it's all based on a baseless narrative and accusation of voter fraud.
It should never happen. That's it's ridiculous that it happened. And that's why a lot of people are backing away from Trump. I mean,
they're distancing themselves. Even people that
members have resigned. Over 200 senators. It's just on both sides of the aisle. I mean, you get some people who are still forever Trumpers, like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, he's like a really cool guy, and he still backs Trump. He still wants the support from that base of people, because again, he wants to run. He wants to run for president, and he wants to be president, so he needs those voters and that influence. It's just, I don't know. And even Washington State or Vancouver, Longview, and Centralia or whatever, Representative Jamie Herrera Butler even, has yet to condone the actions and Trump and all that. And it's ridiculous. It's just, and she still stood up there and objected to the count. And I'm like, did you not see what happened? And you're still fine with Trump. It just, I don't know. It's insane. I don't know.
I've also seen a lot of shareholders distance themselves too.
Yeah. A lot of politicians have lost a lot of funding.
Yeah, Richard Wolff, he's an economist. He also was saying, I think there was like over 15 shareholders that wanted to just cut ties completely with Trump. Yep. Not because not because they don't agree with his, ideologically on the political spectrum, but because it's bad for business and it's more of a PR move than anything, So it's like, even though they're distancing themselves, it's not necessarily because they disagree, that, because he is a conservative, that's basically, and Trump ran, on higher tax cuts for the wealthy. And, I also want to bring up the fact that, this was brought up like right before the election, but a lot of, Republicans like to, especially conservatives, they run on austerity and their budget deficit hawks. But every time a Republican is in the office, they don't hold them accountable to that. Like Rand Paul, for example, he's mentioned quite a few times about, he won't mention anything about Trump's abhorrent 2017 tax cuts to the ultra wealthy, but he wants to all of a sudden become a deficit hawk when it comes to providing COVID relief, financial relief to the people, and it's just really frustrating, to see, when I see libertarians advocating for that. So that's just, I kind of, I'm not trying to steer off track, but I just wanted to mention that too. So.
Yeah, no, it's hypocrisy is what it is. That's politics, I guess. People vandalized the home of Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, and I find that very interesting. Here's one of them. What this McConnell's house here? It says, "Where's my money?" They're missing some apostrophes and stuff, but it's fine.
And they misspelled "where's."
Oh, they did.
That's "where's." Where's my money?
Where's my money?
Punctuation and being punctual matters.
Here's Nancy's home. I can't even read it, but cancel rent. Oh, 2K, cancel rent. We want everything. And then like some paint and stuff. And, it's, I don't know. It's politics has gotten really polarizing, especially those who've been in power for 40, 50 years, like McConnell and Pelosi, whose net worths are in the hundreds of millions. And yet people can't have things that they pay taxes for.
She's received a lot of insider trading, as well as I'm sure McConnell has too.
Well, that's fine though, because
every other developed country that's considered corruption, but it's okay here.
Yeah. So we don't punish our politicians in America. We let them get away with it. And
no, you can't ask them mean questions. So
no, you gotta be nice. It's just weird. Yeah, it's just, and it's people. It's not people. Need help. And I know that people are like, economists will say, well, if we give $2,000 checks to everybody, then that will increase inflation because you're printing money. And putting, and that's, I understand that you borrow money from yourself, you increase inflation. I get the basic idea of that. However, my counter argument to that would be, what the difference though is, if you give $2,000 or whatever to people, they will take that money and put it back into the system. But when you give our tax money to you print our tax money, print more money to other countries, that doesn't put it back in our system. You're just giving money to other countries.
Well, and neither does giving subsidies and corporate welfare to giant CEOs and millionaires and billionaires.
Right. And so it's just,
it just creates more inequality and inequity.
Well, their argument, again, I'll be fair, there's not that many billionaires compared to everyday people. And so they can afford to give a billionaire money because it's less money they have to give them, as opposed to giving everybody else money. So like the amount of inflation wouldn't be as much. And so that's how they justify it. from an
They can
economic.
try to justify that, but they still have, millions of workers that are underpaid. They don't have pensions and they don't have health care at all. And they have to rely on welfare because their employer can't pay them adequate wages, like the Walton family. So, but I understand what you're saying. And
Yeah.
I just have to say that. I just have to also say that, like, it's also really bad. Like, I've heard the inflation argument before, but like wages have become stagnant for several decades, and the trickle down Reaganomics, as we know, and the war on drugs and being harsher on crime obviously has not worked. It's been a failed experiment for several years. But I just wanted to say that I've also heard from economists it's actually worse to, not have any spending and for an economy just to become stagnant too, and I agree that like economic growth, especially for like expansion, we have to be careful with that because, industrialization is just gonna, basically take over everything. But in the same sense, you can't have a stagnant economy either. You have to, be spending because like we're seeing now, I know you want to bring this up. Elon Musk just actually eclipsed Bezos, who eclipsed Bill Gates previously since the pandemic started.
Yep.
And, we have almost two people that are worth nearly $200 billion,
Yep.
And you just have this massive inequality of wealth that sits at the top 1%, while stagnant wages and everything else, it's not, we need a more egalitarian approach to our economic system, in my opinion. So I'll let you carry on.
Fair. It's a fair argument, when you have people, like Bezos and Gates, Zuck, Musk, those type of people,
The big Zuck.
Who just get richer and richer and richer and richer. It's, there's got to be a point when you have too much, and a lot of people argue, a lot of economists and government officials will say, well, if you tax people who make over, $100 million a year, which is like not a whole lot of people, but if you tax them more, like that socialist Bernie wants to do, if you tax them more, then it's going to kill their incentive to actually work. And that's like a fair argument, and I've heard it a few times saying, it's the idea of, let's say if you wanted to tax them 70% on every dollar they earn after 100 million or some shit, then that's just going to kill their incentive to work. Well, I doubt it because, they're still pulling in millions, and that's just they're taxing their income. That's not taxing their assets. That's not taxing their Wall Street money. That's, there's a lot of other avenues where people get their money when they're that wealthy.
I think that's just a fallacy. When you have a tax rate where, you have people in the working class paying a higher rate than the top 1/10 of the 1%, then there's a clear problem and dilemma with their tax code system. So
no, yeah, I agree. That's just an argument that some politicians and economists will use and say you're going to kill innovation and incentivization to work. They're not going to want to work.
Here's my argument against that is like there's a lot of patents and especially when it comes to big pharma and a lot of research that's paid for by public taxpayers' money, and they use this for funding and research. Just like look at the COVID vaccine, for example. They have made a massive amount, big pharma has, off of this pandemic. You don't hear about it so much, but a lot of that, but if you look at like other prescription drugs, a lot of it's come from the funding and the research is from taxpayers' money. And then they sit there and then they somehow get a hold of the patent and then basically you know, they like to price gouge, and it's just, it's I guess in my opinion, just reinforces why privatized healthcare in itself is just, and the whole private, you know, pharmaceutical industry is a conundrum, but that's just a larger topic for a different day. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. The thing with a lot of pharmaceutical companies or a lot of vaccines or medications or what have you, a lot of the research is actually done at public universities, paid for by taxpayers and students, etc. And then
Mhm.
pharmaceutical companies come in and actually just buy it. They just buy the formula and then they take it, and they don't really do most of the research. 70 to 80% of the research is actually done by public universities.
Yeah.
So, you know, when they say, "Oh, this medication costs $1,000 per pill because of you know, R&D costs," you're not doing the R&D costs. A public university is doing the R&D costs. Students and their teachers and their professors are doing the R&D. You're just buying it.
And we can have, and this is one thing I want to tie into like the private and, you know, public sector is, you know, there obviously there's room for, you know, for some private businesses, and that's not like what I'm saying, but what I am saying is, you know, there's a lot of things in the public sector that needs to be expanded upon. And I think it's just to add to that point, you know, there can be services in the government when you have like federal jobs guarantee and programs. You know, not everything has to be profit incentive, you know, like the private sector wants. There can be social services that are just that, a service, not a business for profit incentive. So like the United States Postal Service, you know, that's not a business. And I've seen before when Trump was trying to gut it, a lot of people try to say, and conservatives use this argument that it doesn't make money, and it never was meant to make money. That's not how the United States Postal Service was implemented in the first place in its origins. So it's definitely, you know, you can say the same, you know, like we agreed a long time ago, right? Like public systems like firefighters and policemen, like these aren't privatized. You're not going to get charged, you know, although you are charged if you do take an ambulance for $4,000 if you go a mile away, but but like, you know, the merits of
it's a whole thing. It's a whole mess. One thing I want to talk about is Trump. Once he's out of office, he's just going to return to the private sector to increase his wealth and influence in foreign countries. Trump's namesake company, and this is Politico. I mean, I don't know how they're okay. You know, Trump's namesake company plans to resume foreign real estate projects, likely luxury hotels, as it grapples with a tarnished brand in the United States. So obviously the Trump brand is kind of worthless now in the States. But you know, he needs to pay off hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, which is probably why he's, you know, went into office, trying to pardon himself and his family to try to get rid of that debt.
Well, he could just do arms deals in Saudi Arabia, and hotel fare deals. So he doesn't give a shit.
That's the plan. Company officials, Trump company officials, are already looking into more developments in India, and will be expected to give a second look to projects that are considered in China, Turkey, Colombia, and Brazil. So they've had these deals in the works for a really long time. But I think Trump becoming president, cozying up to a lot of these, you know, getting to actually be with a lot of these leaders, talk to them, having his friends and his family in cabinet, going overseas. You know, there's obviously some type of deal going on, you know, that we don't know about. I'm sure when Kushner, you know, and Eric and Don Jr. are overseas in India or China or Iran or whatever, they're not just talking about U.S. politics. I mean, they're obviously talking about, hey, can we open a hotel, you know, in Dubai? Would that be cool with you guys? You know, there's obviously that's what they're doing, you know, and
He's broken the emoluments clause multiple times, but
Yeah,
he's not the first president to do that, and I'm sure he won't be the last, considering Biden's administration coming in. But that's one thing I was really disappointed in when they did, the impeachment. They did it on a phone call instead of him, having business affairs in foreign governments,
sure.
such as Saudi Arabia. So I just want to add to that.
But he is an authoritarian, and a lot of authoritarian regimes like that, obviously. So, if they can make money off his name and he can make money off his name, they're willing to dupe people in their own countries to make money. That's going to happen. Oh, yeah, you can open hotels in Russia. It's fine. The Russian people will fall for it, and they'll pay you money to stay in your hotel, and then we'll all get money from it. Oh, yeah, you can do it in India. Oh, you can do it in China. It's fine. It's not going to happen in America anymore. I think he's really ruined his name in America. I mean, sure, there's supporters of his that would love to stay at a Trump hotel, but I don't think they have the
But
money.
his image has been tarnished.
That's what I'm saying. His whole name, his whole brand has been tarnished, and it just doesn't mean anything anymore in America. Another thing I want to talk about is the wealth gap. America's wealth gap keeps getting further and further since the pandemic is one thing. We already talked about a little bit with Elon passing Bezos to become the richest man in the world, richest man in history. And it's just, it's irritating. I got this thing here from Forbes, which I guess they know a thing or two about monies. Federal government reports show, among other things, that the poorest 50% of Americans are literally getting crushed by the weight of rising inequalities. The top 10% of wealth distribution, the purple and green areas in the little graphs, hold a large and growing share of U.S. wealth, while the bottom half, the thin red area on the bottom, barely visible, outlining...
That's amazing that depicts the bottom percent, because that right there, I mean, that is so grotesquely inequitable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's bottom 50% here, and it's, you can tell right here, this is the Great Recession, this little 2010, 2014 area, it went down and it stayed low even now. But if you look at the 90s, it was a lot higher, it's insane. And then we look over here at the trillions of nominal dollars here, the top 1% just skyrockets, and then the bottom just gets lower and lower. And so, I mean, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. People are working longer hours for lower wages. People are putting in, 60 to 70, 80% of their income into rent. They're not able to save up money for school. They're not able to save money in case of an emergency. These are real issues that have been brewing since the 90s, since Reaganomics, I think. And it's a real problem. It's, people used to look at it and be like, oh, well, I'm going to be able to take a vacation someday. I'm going to be able to go to the Bahamas or Hawaii. That's becoming less and less. Are you telling me that
Reaganomics doesn't work?
No, trickle-down
economics. It doesn't work?
No, because it's like my dad explained it to me, and I was like 15. And I was asking him, I was like, hey, how does Reaganomics work? And he's like, okay, come here. And we walk over to the faucet, in the kitchen, and he turns on the water, and he grabs a cup of water and he puts it there, and he said, okay, you get it, it's filling up, I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, it starts to pour over, and that's the trickle down, and then the water goes, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, but check this out. And he gets a bigger glass, and then all that stuff that's pouring gets into the bigger glass. And he's like, it's just like that over and over. He's like, this is Reaganomics in a nutshell.
Reaganomics is shareholders accumulating more wealth with stock buybacks, but they want to dupe you into thinking, here's crumbs for the masses. Oh, and here's some giant tax cuts as well.
What Reaganomics is akin to is monarchy. That's really what it comes down to. And that's what it is. It's an oligarch system where, hey, we're going to give you some money, but you got to give us all the money first. It really sounds like something that King would do. Hey, give me all your gold, and then I'll give you a little bit. why would I do that? Why would I give you everything? That's
Yeah,
stupid.
let them eat cake.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I worked in France, right?
Marie Antoinette. Yeah, you know what?
And then there's this thing that's going on right now. It's kind of the big thing post the Capitol riots is the 25th Amendment, and if Congress should invoke the 25th Amendment and remove Trump from office. Uh, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Sanders, Rep AOC, and others are calling for it. What are your thoughts?
I think honestly, like I've heard the argument from, saying that this could, have repercussions, maybe possibly on the left, but I don't really think that it will. Um, I'll let you elaborate on what your opinion is, but um, I think that they could. I've heard the idea of like a second impeachment, which could bar Trump from running in 2024. I don't know if you're allowed to if you have two impeachments,
I don't know.
but um, honestly, like I do think this could be applicable, but I'll let you elaborate on it.
Um, it says here more than 200 lawmakers, 191 House members, and 37 senators on both sides now support removing Donald Trump from office. And I'm
kind of torn.
He incited the group. He, was that gaslighting, or I call it asslighting. He asslit all those people, and they got really upset and destroyed a bunch of stuff. And he was complacent and didn't say anything. And even after all it happened, he still said and still reaffirmed that everything was stolen, that it was fraudulent, and all this shit.
So yeah, I mean, they could do a second impeachment essentially by doing this 25th Amendment.
There's
right.
2 weeks left of his presidency, less than 2 weeks. I'm sitting here thinking, what damage could he do in 2 weeks? Well, I mean, I also read in the news that Nancy Pelosi did call the Joint Chiefs and asked them, hey, can you maybe not allow Trump to have the nuclear codes? Because he's that unhinged. They're that worried that he's going to start some shit with Iran or something, or Iran, you know what I mean? And so 2 weeks, you can do a lot of shit in 2 weeks. You can mess a lot of stuff up. You can pardon a bunch of people. You can use your executive orders to mess a lot of stuff up because, that stuff can be challenged, but it does take time for that to be challenged. And while it's being challenged, it's still wreaking havoc. It's the counter.
Sorry, go ahead.
The counter argument of him not being impeached or not wanting to impeach him is because it could risk angering his supporters even more.
Yeah, I was going to say de-escalation, and relations for like the public sphere, I've seen as an argument towards that. But, I'm not a fan of his authoritarian and like military style, like his poking and prodding that he's done with Iran, with the ruthless sanctions on medicine and everything else that he's done. I'll give him credit on like what he did for North Korea, even though I think that was a bit of a photo op and kind of exaggerated. But at least he attempted to de-escalate that, because I know that Biden has had his qualms under the Obama administration with North Korea. I don't personally want to be involved in a nuclear arms race. So,
well, there's no arms race with North Korea or Iran. We have more arms than them. It's just the fact of them.
No, but there's enough nukes to basically blow up the world multiple times. So
no
one wins in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem, and I think that's what Trump could do. He could really escalate that.
Yeah, honestly, like, like I could see the efforts made, and and just the whole conjured and fabricated narrative of like this election fraud. Like, I really don't think that his apology, I mean, that was the most half-assed bullshit apology like statement. Like that, like, and he still didn't even discredit it. I mean, he really did undermine, like, you know, I have my criticisms with voter suppression and gerrymandering, but when I heard that he wanted to, change like the voting, like the aspects of voting, he wanted to undermine states' constitutions for voting. And when he made that statement on Twitter before he got banned, that's what I was hearing is, oh, he wants to basically implement more voter suppression because he knows that conservatives, have a lot of unpopular policies. So the only way that they know that they can win is by implementing more of these policies. Like displacement of minorities in districts, what have you. Like they were against mail-in voter ballots. But yeah, honestly, like at this point, 2 weeks I've heard that for a while, that he's wanted to possibly start a war with Iran right before he leaves. And I think that would just be obviously a terrible, terrible idea. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that.
But at the same time, a president has never pushed for a coup. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just.
I think that this actually would be applicable, like in this.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think they should. I think, a lot of people are like, oh, whatever. It's 2 weeks left. Like, yeah, it's 2 weeks left, and then remove him. Then remove him. That same argument then goes. That same argument. Oh, it's only 2 weeks left. You shouldn't do it 2 weeks. Let them have those 2 weeks. Okay, well, if that's your argument, then why don't we have that same argument of you shouldn't elect you shouldn't appoint someone to the Supreme Court within a week before the election. What about that? What what I mean? It's that same argument works either way, and so you can't have.
Well, you see, if Lindsey Graham says that, then he doesn't have to be held accountable.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Even though he did say you can hold me to my words.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a fallacy to think that a lot could happen in 2 weeks. It didn't take very long for the Patriot Act to have huge ripple effects and ramifications after 9/11. So, and I'm sorry, but I just don't think that was not even an apology. I mean, really, he made multiple posts, but it didn't go far enough, at all.
All he said was basically, sorry, not sorry. That's
no, because he still gave into the narrative that when there is no evidence of this election voter fraud. Like I said, I have my criticisms with the DNC and how they treated Bernie, and when it comes to the general election, each state has its own constitution for counting votes.
Sure.
And we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I mean, I'm totally on board with mail-in voting. Oregon's done it for years.
Washington's done it for years, and due to that, they have a high voter turnout. The reason that people are objecting to Pennsylvania and Nevada is because the state legislature holds the power to change electoral rules, not the governor or the Supreme Court of those states. And so what people are saying is those states, the governor and the Supreme Courts of those states violated the Constitution because they didn't go through the proper channels, such as the legislature of those states. My counter argument to that is governors of states, which are basically presidents of their little states, have this thing called emergency discretion during emergencies. And a pandemic is an emergency. You don't want people to spread the virus during a pandemic that's killing, people every single day. Somebody dies, every 21 seconds from COVID in America. And allowing people to get a ballot mailed to them, and they can mail it back, they can drop it somewhere in a box, it slows the spread of the virus. And so when you have people saying, oh, well, they're going against this, they're going against that, governors have emergency discretion they can use for emergencies. This was a real emergency, and they did not want people to die because of voting. It's just, this is the right thing to do. And I think when it all comes down to it, when you think about it, the Republicans can't win when more people vote. That's really what it comes down to.
No, because they have more of their base turning out to basically stay in line, and more
And
Democratic voters are inclined to submit by mail. And I'm sure independents are as well.
a lot of it too is because time. It takes time to stand in line. It takes time to go stand in line to vote. Some places could be hours. Some places in cities could be hours. And when people don't have time, especially now when people are working more hours, multiple jobs, they have kids, they can't stand in line for hours and miss work and pay for childcare and all this other stuff. You should give them their ballot and they can just vote from home and send it in. Voter fraud is really uncommon, and it's never changed an election, as much as Trump may think so. During the general election, I was in a Zoom meeting with Washington State's Secretary of State, and she was saying something like, of how many ballots, millions of ballots they've received in Washington since they've had vote by mail, only like, 30 or 40 of them came back as fraudulent. I mean, that's out of millions of ballots, 30 or 40. That's not enough to sway. And a lot of it too is, they just had a change of address, or this person was dead. That's 30 or 40. It's not millions of ballots in a creek somewhere with only Trump's name on them. It's vote by mail.
Well, it makes more sense. It makes more sense to have people like count it as well, because, I mean, if you're going to be reliant on like software and hardware, what's to say that they can't succumb to some type of like cyber attack, or exploitation, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
and then you have people who argue, people who are counting them are liberals. People who are counting them are on the left. I actually organized and helped run a polling station during the general election with a few other people. It doesn't matter. You swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of your state, the election laws. And if you break those, that's like a federal offense. And you don't want to break those. Plus, I don't think people who volunteer their time to count votes are trying to maliciously miscount stuff for one reason or another. I don't believe that, because I've done it, and you don't do it. Somebody needs help with something, you print it off for them, you hand them their ballot, you say, okay, you fold it up, you put it in this sleeve, and then you put that sleeve inside this envelope, and then you drop it into this box that's locked, that's bolted to some part of the building. And then at the end of the night, when you're done, the polling station is closed, people from the county's office, they come with a police escort, grab that box, and are escorted with a police escort to their vehicle, and then escorted by police in their vehicles to the counting station. It's unlikely that voter fraud or malicious intent by people in charge of running the stations, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. No. Like, we don't live in a developing country where that's rampant. We live in a secure democracy, and it's irritating that people claim without evidence, again, that there's massive voter fraud and they stole the election. They didn't. You did a shitty job of getting key states on your side. Your fault. No one else's. Own up to it.
Yeah, I mean, like gerrymandering and rigging votes, that's up their alley. You can look up. It's actually like a pretty like interesting dynamic. I mean, it's really fucked up, and I completely disagree with it. But if you look at like how they try to displace minorities in certain districts, they'll have like certain voting booths like several hours away, from
Yeah.
like one opposite side of the state to the other. It's pretty blatant. I've seen judges that have like even, voted against that. I can't remember which state it was, but there's several states, especially like red states, that have tried to have done that, but they failed because they were like, the court that was overseeing it, was saying like, yeah, no, this isn't fair in the slightest bit. So
Yeah, it doesn't happen. That's not a thing that happens very often, at all. So I just don't. There's no evidence to claim it. There's no evidence to prove. He's had 60 court cases have all been thrown out. You didn't rig it. No, you failed. You failed to get enough people to vote for you. That's what happened. That's it. That's the end of the story.
and the federal court, I mean, like they stay out of like the states, constitutions. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's not their jurisdiction. That's not their
We have
agenda.
a dual federalist system for this exact reason.
Right.
This is what Republicans like. This was a compromise when the country was being formed, was dual federalism. A lot of conservatives really like the idea of dual federalism because it allows them to adjust and form policies that really suit their constituents and their citizens and their states, and that's great. But all of a sudden, when it goes against, when it just clashes with their idea, oh, that's unfair. Why didn't the federal government step in? Well, don't you want less government and more states' rights? This is the states' rights you want, and now you're upset about it. It's
a laughably biased and hypocritical notion.
Yeah, maybe you should do a better job of appeasing to a majority of people. Maybe you should have policies that affect the majority of people in your states, and then you won't have that problem. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Be a better candidate, elect better candidates, have better policies, and then you'll do better. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Did you also see like when Josh Hawley was I think he was giving them like the rioters like a fist up, like he was encouraging.
Oh yeah.
And like advocating for that, because I've seen a lot of people on my timeline mention that. So we're trying to hold him accountable as well.
He's lost a lot of funding. A lot of people who have backed him, a lot of businesses who are behind him have pulled out.
He lost a book deal too.
Yeah,
the
publisher dropped him.
Yeah,
he could just release it on Parler. It'll be fine. He can release a whole book on that platform, I'm sure.
Well, again, he wants like conservatives that want to use the freedom of speech argument to a publication, but it's like they're a private business. They're not a part of the public sector. So
don't they like private business? It's kind of weird that now they want big government and more government intervention.
Right.
Interesting.
Maybe we shouldn't have oligarchs, period.
Maybe having billionaires control everything and having their way and only their policies matter. Maybe that's the problem.
And algorithms that promote rugged, individuals that, like it encourages and manifests, like infighting, it does. Like a lot of these algorithms, like on Facebook. I don't even personally go on Facebook anymore, but I know that certain posts and recommendations, whether that be on YouTube with channels and content creations, like they systematically want, to have like a feedback loop of like, in an echo chamber, essentially, and pinning people against each other. Like it's a pretty interesting dynamic. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Because your posts are limited, like your reach of what you can see and what isn't and what's recommended. That's all determined by an algorithm on Facebook. It's not conspiratorial to say that. Like it's an undisputed fact.
It works. That's how it reads your interests, takes your interests, and gives you something based on your interests. It's
and also it promotes like what people like what content and what people's posts it wants to show you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean that's real. That's a real thing. So
yeah, it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. It's a large ongoing problem with the oligarch system that we have with big tech. But so yeah, it's just if he doesn't like that company, then maybe he should go to a different company, or maybe he should try to reform the system
Yeah.
that, but he's,
Self-publish.
hey, that's an idea.
Self-publish. So,
He can come up with his own platform.
well, he can self-publish through,
Yeah, he could.
Amazon or through his own thing, and then he can sell that book. He can get backers on Patreon, and then he can be on Breitbart, and he can go on
Yeah, he can go on alt-right and
go on
publications.
and promote his book to those people.
He can go on InfoWars. No one's stopping him. Go ahead.
You can do that. We're not saying you can't do that. If you want to
Yeah.
and go on a tour to those, I'm not saying you can't do it. Go ahead and do it, but don't be mad at companies for saying no, we don't want this. That's their right as a company. They can say no.
I mean, he tarnished his own image by doing that. I mean,
Yep.
that was a pretty disgusting display.
Well, that's yeah. I don't know.
But I think we should wrap it up around there. One thing I wanted to mention is Joe Manchin. I don't know if you saw it today. He made a comment about possibly not supporting $2,000 checks. Then he backtracked on that statement. But that's something to keep an eye out for, because that one vote could be integral for passing legislation, and it's just a giant, it will actually damage, the Democrats' image. Not that it isn't already, damaged in some capacity, but, it's just one thing to consider going forward, just like, because he's such a conservative and uses austerity, that it's like, why the fuck are you a Democrat? I don't know. I just thought to mention that.
I think he's holding out for some type of concession. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
I know that he mentioned like vaccinations were supposedly higher on his list of priorities, but you literally ran on that in the Georgia Senate runoffs, promising the American people $2,000 checks. To backtrack on that will undermine and like really tarnish, your image. So I just think that like if the Democrats want to do good in like their, re-elections in 2022, they can't backtrack on things like that. Even Biden knows that. And Biden, I mean, hasn't really done shit. Bernie's the one that had to like even bring this to the table. And Josh Hawley, ironically, was the one that brought that in the forefront. So just going forward, like that's something to pay attention to, because you need that 50-50 vote, and then Kamala Harris will be the tiebreaker for passing legislation. So just thought I'd like to end off on that. So
no, fair point. Cool. Well, that is the end of episode dos. Yeah, we will catch you guys in the next one. Take care.
thank you. Bye-bye.